Hi, I'm Liam Dann, New Zealand Herald Business Editor at Large, and welcome to this episode of Money Talks. This is a podcast about money, but we're not going to tell you how to get rich, and we're not going to try and pick the next interest rate move. In this series, I'll be talking to interesting New Zealanders about how money has shaped their lives and what they've learned over the years. For today's podcast, I'm joined by celebrated author and recent winner of the Ockahm Book Awards, Emily Perkins. Kia ora, Emily. Welcome to Money Talks.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me.
Firstly, congratulations on winning the prize for fiction at the Ockahm Awards for Lioness. How did getting the big prize feel?
Oh, thanks. Look, it really surprised me. I mean, prizes are strange because, of course, you don't really put yourself forward for them or write with having them in mind, and there honestly aren't that many of them in New Zealand either. So there's quite a bit of tension around it, I guess, for the writing community in general.
The publishers get very excited, don't they?
Yeah, and I've got to say, it's like I really do feel like it is another chance for books to get a bit more attention and a bit more publicity and a bit more of people talking about them, which is always fantastic. And then, I was just blown away. Look, there was an amazing short list of books, amazing long list of books. It was a really good year for New Zealand publishing. And I was thrilled and really surprised. And it does mean money, and these sort of windfalls are pretty rare in the book world. So
absolutely. There's a chance to write some more.
It's definitely a chance to write some more. It's a chance just to keep going. I mean, it's affirmation kind of psychologically and materially. And I believe you had the head of the overall sponsors.
From Ockahm, Mark Todd.
Yeah,
yes. Yep.
Yeah, you had him
really
on the show.
Really interesting guy.
And there's a lot. I mean, the award I won was the Jan Medlicott Acorn Prize for Fiction. So, it comes with some very generous backing from all involved.
Yeah, look, I really enjoyed Lioness. Just finished it last night, actually, and
cool.
It's a triumph for me because I don't read a lot of novels these days. My wife already had it, obviously, but I've become increasingly either non-fiction or stuck on my phone, and hard to finish books. But look, I thought it was interesting. Obviously, there's some themes there about self-discovery and all that sort of stuff and midlife crisis. But for this podcast, there was some quite big themes there around money and class, and that whole world of finance and property development and all that sort of stuff. I just wondered how you came to sort of settle on that as the backdrop for this novel, and what your influence and inspiration was there.
Yeah, I think I always find money a really interesting subject for fiction and for drama. There's an American writer who I really admire called Grace Paley. And one of the things that she said about writing was that every story should include the facts of blood and money. And, she was meaning to elaborate on that, blood as in humanity, how we relate to each other, relationships, family, that kind of thing. And money being the sort of practical thing that activates it all. And, it's not the only thing that activates, obviously, but it's something that influences relationships quite a lot. And, I think the way that money can be a preoccupant, whether you've got, not enough or you've got too much, there's always sort of interesting stories around that. So as a plot engine, I think it's really, really interesting. So I've written about it, having it's kind of in the background in the past, but I was particularly interested with Lioness and writing about the world where people are incredibly comfortable, and from the point of view of somebody who has jumped class in a way. So the narrator, Therese Thorne, came from, really humble sort of circumstances in her young life. And then by marrying into money as a very young woman, she kind of immediately became part of this other sort of fairly rarefied world. So there were sort of character reasons I wanted to explore it in terms of who she was and her sense of identity. But also I think it's just a fascinating backdrop. I mean, that idea of Look, we're always going to be drawn to stories about the unhappy rich.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of it, and it rang true from what I've seen outside in, and in terms
good.
of I covered the global financial crisis and all the property developers and finance companies going over. There's a certain, I guess, a kind of person that makes money central, and then the world of trusts and lawyers and things takes over. And I noticed you referenced a book by Eldridge Grigg. What was the sort of research you did around that world?
Well, one of the primary sources was this wonderful book by Stephen Eldridge Grigg called The Rich, and it's a New Zealand history. I'd written a draft already before I found that book, but it was very sort of affirming in terms of some of the kinds of different flavors of wealth. He talks about the distinction between the kind of landed gentry class, many of who've got deep origins and sort of arriving here and stealing land, coming from other parts of the world and getting a foothold here, or being a part of a bigger sort of imperial or colonial kind of global movement, like lots of families that have also got I guess, kind of colonial connections in other parts of the world as well. So that was sort of one tranche. And then the idea of a more manufacturing or sort of merchant class, just the sort of different social distinctions that those kinds of wealth generate. So that was interesting characterologically as well. And then I went to, I'm not sure if it's still running, but there was a fantastic thing called the Ford Film Festival, I think, which was on in Auckland. And my main character is married to a guy who's a property developer, but in an early draft of the novel, he was more in finance, like a hedge fund manager or something like that. And so I was investigating different kinds of sort of pools of money and different sorts of fraudulent activity around these different territories. And then I settled a bit later on him being a property developer. So, there was just a fair bit of reading.
Yeah, sure. Look, we better jump back a bit, and I'll ask you about your relationship with money, I guess. So one of the things I like to ask is what your first memory of money is in terms of actually remembering having it in your hand or having it influence your world. Yeah,
I remember the sort of physical sensory aspects of it really strongly, like what a 2-cent piece felt like, and a 2-cent piece compared to a 1-cent piece, and a 5-cent piece, and the different colours, the different metals, the different shininess, the different images. I think the kowhai on the 2 cents and the tuatara on the 5 cents, like just as objects, those coins were really fascinating to me, and I think they would have always meant sweets. I think I was very interested in sweets and sort of junk food in general, and the kind of thing that we didn't much go in for in my house. And so any opportunity I got where I got some pocket money, whatever it was, that was what it was going to.
It's interesting. If there's one theme through this podcast that just is with everyone I talk to, it's that they went off down to the dairy, to get sweets with their pocket money.
Well, I mean, there was something, I think when you're little as well, there is just something so magical about that idea of the little white paper bag that's got the lolly mix in it, or, a K-bar or a Buzz bar, or all those things that you could spin out and make last for ages. So absolutely, that's what money equaled to me, was the opportunity to eat sweets. And then later on, chippies and a bit later on cigarettes. But by that time, I was earning my own money. Mostly I was. I mean, by that time, I sort of had a paper round and stuff like that.
Yeah. So was that the first part-time job?
Oh, I had a weird kind of history because my mother and sister and I were cast in a few TV commercials when my sister and I were really young. And so really my first experience of earning money was when I was sort of like 7 or 8. And for that era, it was a lot of money. Like it was a weird, sort of lump sum for a day's work. And we went traveling when I was about 9 and 10 for my dad's work, but we sort of went around lots of other places and stayed with family and went to, like a really quite a big trip for those days. This was like 1979 or 80. And the money that we'd made doing ads contributed to that.
Yeah.
So
there was kind of different money, big money, but sort of more set aside.
Yeah, which was sort of the story of me with money for a little while. It was either these, strange kind of amounts, or then something like I had a shared paper round. I did lots of babysitting. A friend and I did sort of invented a summer job for ourselves where we looked after other people's children and did a kind of quote unquote art club with them, student job search jobs, painting people's sheds, that kind of thing. And then when I left school when I was 15 to do a job in a drama program that was made by TVNZ, which was a year's work. And that was, again, sort of not at the sort of being paid in the commercial rates end of the spectrum, but it was still, it was like a lot of money for a 16-year-old to be earning.
Yeah. Was that straight out of school, or did you leave school to do that?
Well, I had got my UE and I left school to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was, I was sort of swinging between this kind of like, whatever a paper round pays. And, once I was earning the TV money, my mother had me pay rent at home.
Yeah.
And, it was just strange because it was sort of like, then it was back to waitressing or...
Yeah. And was this growing up? It sounded like you moved around a bit, like born in Christchurch, but you grew up in Auckland and Wellington. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, we moved from Christchurch to Auckland when I was just a baby, and then we moved to Wellington when I was 11, and then I sort of bounced up and down a bit between the two in my kind of later teens and early 20s.
And do you remember much about money in the wider sense at the time, either with the family and also, that's growing up through, pretty similar to me, through that radical change in the early 80s and 1984 and all that sort of stuff?
I mean, I had a middle-class upbringing. I mean, it was like really, materially comfortable. And I remember the sort of change of mood that seemed to come in with the 80s as well. And then I remember, it was a bit later, but I do remember vividly the Employment Contracts Act and, that whole, I remember I think I was...
busting of the unions, yeah.
Yeah, all of that, just being the sense that there was a lot of societal change that was going on around money and employment and rights and class, and how these things were all sort of interwoven to affect a sense of, the sort of sense of society and what society here was.
As a student, and I guess as a high school student, were you always interested in English, I guess, and was writing always on the cards? I see that, you sort of fell into the acting almost out of school, and that could have gone that way.
Yeah, because after I did that TV show, I went to Toi Whakaari, went to drama school and pursued that for a little while. But I had been kind of writing as well, and I loved English at school, English and all those sorts of classics, those kind of subjects. So I always did want to work in the arts in some way. And I suppose because early on I'd had quite a bit of luck with getting acting jobs, that was the thing I was drawn to initially.
Was there ever a sense of concern either from your parents or even yourself, just that, it's obviously if you're thinking about, financial security, the arts is kind of risky. Certainly, ups and downs, there's potential for great success, but I guess neither acting or writing are necessarily going to be financially guaranteed.
No, that's right. I don't think I thought very long term at all in that regard. And my parents were pretty encouraging. They would have probably really liked me to have a more steady backup option, but they certainly never said, don't do this. Again, it's funny the different effects of class, because we think about it through the money lens, but I do think one of the things that can be the case, and this is why I believe we should talk about it more and why I'm interested in writing about it and, talking to you about it today, there's a kind of thing about having a middle class or upper middle class, sort of background where you're encouraged to expect that you can do things. It's a sort of mindset as much as anything. And so I think in that sense, I was incredibly privileged. Like, I just think that that's a sort of aspect of class privilege that it's good for us to be more conscious about, because it's not, there's not a kind of equality around that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to think we were expanding that, but it's possible it's going the other way. I mean,
That's right.
People are more concerned. To get a house, for example, kids have got to be thinking early about how the heck they're going to get the deposit and pay the mortgage and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and look, I've got kids who are around that kind of age group now, of like late teens and early 20s, and it's just, you just don't know where to start. You really don't know where to start thinking about that. So I think there's a way in which I was able to sort of feel confident pursuing a life in the arts, partly because the arts in general were a big part of my childhood and upbringing, and valued in my childhood and in my education. But also, because there was this sort of privileged idea that what you wanted to do, you could probably make work, this sort of sense that, just a sort of confidence. And, of course, there were times when it was really harder, and I lived in London from my mid-20s to my mid-30s, and, that was also like often really financially challenging, but I was always around other people who are doing similar things.
Yeah.
So it's kind of become part of a world where that precarity is the norm, unfortunately.
And you sort of have found a way through all those years, and I guess now to some extent as well, to sort of keep writing, but also working in the publishing industry, teaching, those sort of things, to keep some steady income as well as writing. Is that a difficult balancing act?
Yeah, I think so. And I've sort of come and gone from doing freelance work to having, tranches of doing full-time work, and I've just sort of cobbled it together. Again, not with any great plan or much degree of kind of foresight or the future. It's all been a bit accidental. I mean, it's sort of, I would say it's worked out over the years, but there've definitely been times when I haven't got my own writing done and my own projects finished, because I've been, it's been more important to have a full-time job and to be secure in that way for my family. And, when the kids were younger, particularly. So there are ways in which it's hard to write or make kind of different sorts of artwork and have full-time employment. There's all kinds of, like CNZ, did a study, Creative New Zealand, like a couple of years ago. I don't know if you want any facts and figures in here. This is from a study that Creative New Zealand did with NZ On Air and conducted by an organisation called Kantar Public. And this is a couple of years ago. Creative professionals' median income in New Zealand is $37,000. Compared to the median of $61,800 for salary and wage earners. So this sort of, it goes on from there. And the median income from creative pursuits alone, like if you're not supplementing your income, is $19,500 a year. And then that shrinks if you're a woman, and that shrinks again if you're a deaf or disabled artist. So it's like there are, it's very useful to have these facts, I think. And
I mean, it's the idea that you have to it's sort of this almost a romantic idea that you almost have to sacrifice everything else to be, especially a novelist or a poet or something like that. I mean, did you sort of always push back against that a bit?
Yeah, I do push back against that, because I feel like that sort of, the idea of the starving artist in the garret, that particular cliche, I mean, it just doesn't serve the artist, And obviously we're coming into a time which is even more complicated by the different ways that, arts get sort of consumed and commodified, and the sort of dreaded word content that gets bandied around, the kind of reduction of a lot of artistic practice to this concept of content. And then you've got those sorts of ideas that there are plenty of other people making money out of artists' work. So I'm thinking about musicians and sort of platforms where their work might be accessed. There's enormous inequality in the arts in terms of, how people get paid and and certainly any kind of security around that. And look, I'm incredibly lucky. I'm writing full-time at the moment, and I'm well aware that I'm in a really particularly privileged position in New Zealand terms, being able to do that right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's going to always be the case, but the fact is I can do it at the moment. And that's a rare thing. So I'm well aware that I'm speaking from, a particularly fortunate position as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, you work to get there. I mean, but it's...
No, it's not like it's just sort of gets... I don't doubt that. And I guess sort of comparatively with other fields as well, it's got its challenges. But I just mean across the arts in general, there are people who are pursuing it against great odds. And I really admire that.
It's tough.
And I wish that there were, sorry, while I'm on my little soapbox, but this is where I do think that it would be great to investigate the idea of a universal basic income, or certainly some kind of income for artists that would mean that we were able to experience arts made by practitioners from any walk of life, rather than it being something that becomes only available to people who can afford to pursue it.
Yeah, and then to survive on it, there is an element of not so much luck or whatever, but it's very difficult if you're producing only for the New Zealand market. Did you feel, you've presumably got more reach now, and does that help? Because, I've noticed with book publishing in particular, the New Zealand market is so small. And it's probably the same with music and bands and things. As soon as you find a niche outside of New Zealand, it's got more potential financially, I guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think because I first started publishing when I was living in the UK, so I've always had this sort of double thing where my books have come out there and here at the same time. And even Australia is just a much bigger market than New Zealand. So if you can get work going over there, then that's also a really good thing. It's definitely hard and small here, and that's another reason why I just believe that state support for the arts is necessary if we're going to have any kind of arts culture at all.
Yeah, and actually exporting it to help export it to the world, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
Have you worked with people around adapting your work into, film, television, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I have. So various things have kind of come and gone in terms of rights over the years. And then, there's the rights for Lioness have been picked up, so that's really great. But there's sort of nothing to say about it until it's at the next. Yeah. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated kind of process.
Yeah, and it's a long process. So it's wonderful. I think there's one thing that I've got to by this stage of my career is that I celebrate every small little moment, because you never know if it's going to lead to anything else. And it's just worth celebrating in and of itself. So yeah, I'm thrilled that the rights have been picked up.
Yeah, but New Zealand, New Zealand arts generally is in a place where you can set a story like Lioness. It's a New Zealand story in terms of setting and location and some of the language, but it's also a fairly modern Western universal story as well. So the world can deal with New Zealand as a backdrop and not be too thrown by that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can see that across the success of, say a recent example of the TV series After the Party, it's just done brilliantly in Australia. It's been winning prizes in France. It's looking to get, it's going to show in the UK later this year. So something can be, I think it's so true of the arts in general, that something can be very specific to the place that it comes from and to its location. But if it pays close enough attention to that, then that unleashes often a kind of universality that people can connect with from anywhere.
I've got a few quick-fire money questions that we throw at guests. One of them would be, what's the poorest you've ever been?
Probably just in overdraft.
So deepest in debt you've been, sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I suppose, deepest in debt would be having a mortgage. I mean, yeah, having a mortgage on. We bought our first flat when we were living in the UK, and it was actually more achievable there because you could have like a zero deposit, like a tiny deposit. Interest rates were much lower than they were here at the time, and you could get interest-only mortgages. So that was sort of how we got a foothold. And then, I don't know, whenever my mortgage was at its biggest,
yeah.
it would have been the deepest in debt.
Sure. And sort of the flip side of that is do you recall a time when you felt like, okay, you're comfortable enough now, and what would be the most indulgent purchase you can remember having made?
I think that my most indulgent spending of money would be travel, definitely.
Are you someone who sort of cares more about money for experiences rather than things, would you say?
Well, I would. I mean, I do also like nice things. And this is where, sort of coming from and writing Lioness, like I'm examining the sort of soul of this woman who's married into money and found that the nice things that she surrounded herself with are a bit of a trap, and they're kind of preventing her from seeing other kinds of ways of living and really being, more true to herself. But I didn't want to judge that either, because I can understand why nice things sort of become talismanic to her. And, when I say nice things, I mean, you could be talking about something very, very small that is just a purely, an object that kind of gives you some sort of comfort or sense of beauty to something much bigger. So, yeah, I would find it hard to get rid of my creature comforts for sure. But I think it's really about you don't need to keep on accruing those things at all. I'm a big believer in the sort of concept of enough-ism. And that was another thing I wanted to investigate with the book. Why is it that people don't just stop when they've got enough?
Yeah.
Why not? It's an absolute mystery to me and an unanswerable question. So I was really keen to explore that through those characters.
Yeah, I mean, some of the characters do challenge that whole idea of, I guess, that lifestyle, which is Teresa's shops and things that is sold, that kind of traps people into the next designer thing. The nice thing about a novel, I guess, is that you can have an argument with yourself via different characters.
Liam, that is perfectly put. I mean, that's exactly what I think that fiction and drama can do, is sort of have these arguments and just activate them and have them be alive and complicated and not be black and white, not have to come down on a side of right or wrong, but just sort of really exploring the complexity of the issues. I mean, hopefully, through a fun and entertaining story that's going to carry you along in that sense as well. So those sorts of different, knotty kind of approaches to the material world were a big part of the engine of the writing for me.
Sure. I mean, one of the questions I always ask on this, and it sort of goes to that what you were saying about why people keep doing it, is, is making money important to you, or is it more of a byproduct of success?
It's a byproduct. I mean, I think it's weird. We do live in a world where money is seen as a marker of success, and we know how really misconstrued that can be. It's just like absolutely, that's the sort of, it's really dangerous to make that correlation, I think. But I think examining what you mean by success is something that you have to do and keep doing, through your life in various different ways. And for me, creative success is not to do with money.
Yeah.
It's not about that.
I mean, I guess that that makes sense. I'm asking that question of a novelist, and people might expect that answer. But I would say what's interesting is I've asked it of property developers and basically billionaires, multi-millionaires, and they all say the same thing. They all say money is not important. It's always, whether it's structuring the perfect business deal or, just they're incredible goal setters, some of these people. And it just so happens that if you're in property development or finance, that money is a big byproduct of that success. And so,
I'd say then if it's not the point of the success, then all the more reason to spread it around.
Yes, fair enough.
It's a great opportunity for them to do that.
I sometimes ask people what their favourite song about money is on this podcast. I guess I could ask that, but I wonder, do you have a favourite book that touches on wealth and money?
Oh, well, I mean, I would really recommend this book, the Stephen Eldred book.
Yeah, I'm interested in that, actually. I hadn't heard of it.
It's very entertainingly written, and, it's
just called The Rich.
It's called The Rich, I think, A Social History of New Zealand, perhaps. I might get that slightly wrong, but it goes up to the 90s. I think that's about as far as it goes, and obviously things have changed even more since then, but he's certainly got the trajectory that has led us to where we currently are.
Yeah, for sure. One last question, really. This is sort of a big social, economic question, but what we sort of ask is if we could make you Prime Minister for the day and give you control of the economy and society for a day, is there some policy that you would put at the top of the list that you would like to enact to really address equity and social and economic inequality?
Look, I know it's a hard one to work out because there are lots of different kind of approaches and complexities that would come out of it, but I would go for a UBI. That would probably be the first thing I'd do. And maybe also I'd be looking at different ways of honouring Te Tiriti and, pushing some more policies through in that regard. And I think those two things hand in hand would do us an enormous amount of good.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask, would you like to see more government investment in the arts? But I guess if you had that universal basic income, it might not have to be doled out in the same way.
It might look different the way it comes through. And you'd need a lot of very good minds working on it and just fine-tuning it. And, it might take a few different goes to get it right. But I think it would be much more fair than the way things are now.
Cool. Well, that's it from us. Thank you very much, Emily Perkins, for talking to us for Money Talks.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Money Talks. If you want to get in touch, drop me a line at liam.dan@nzme.co.nz. And you can read more from me at nzherald.co.nz. Thanks to my producer, Ethan Sills, and sound engineer, Leanne McDonald. Follow Money Talks on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, with new episodes available every Thursday.